If you believe art to be the expression of the cultural zeitgeist, it is interesting to compare the Christian art of the East to that of the West during the Middle Ages. If you Google Middle Age art bubonic plague, you'll find hundreds of illustrations and paintings of people actually dying, lying on a sick bed, or bodies being stacked up by artists in Western Europe. And many of these images are painted well after the fact, but these sorts of illustrations and paintings don't seem to exist as much in the Eastern world, and instead you have icons. I'm not an art historian, but I think that this difference tells us something about how cultures work through their times of trouble. Today we're here to discuss what it is about icons that actually help us in times of trouble. My thesis is that engaging with Christian icons from the very beginning has always been about sorting out our human relationship to fear, sickness, death, and all the troubles that face each one of us as human beings on a daily basis. Even though these icons themselves don't highlight lots of gore, suffering, or war. You have all heard, I'm sure, a million times that icons are symbols which bridge and connect the immaterial with the material. It is because of this intimate union of the material with the immaterial through the icon that the icon consoles us in many ways. So let's look at some examples, both contemporary and in history, of the way in which people have used icons during time of trouble to shed light on why people turn to icons, and by extension, how we, who are in the middle of a pandemic right now, might be helped. We all know that icons decorating churches, homes, serve a liturgical purpose. Many of you have icon corners and pray with icons. We might simply find it soothing to be in a quiet place, but have not necessarily internalized the full purpose of the icon. So I want to look outside the church and the home to more public uses of icons to perhaps give us a different vantage point from which to understand the icon and its impact. In the Orthodox Church, there is a daily list of saints whose memory we commemorate that day. I highlight this to demonstrate that the continuous daily connection between saints and events in the past with the ongoing present life of the church. There is no us now and them in the past, rather it's all of us together in this ongoing present life at the same time. Generally on these lists, there are 3 to 6 saints, and they're from various time periods and from all different parts of the world. And sometimes these lists include sort of odd things to us Westerners, like the third finding of the head of John the Baptist. Today, on July 18th, it includes an icon. And here is the icon of the day. It's called the Tolga icon. Including icons is not very unusual. So I'm going to quickly read the story. The Tolga icon of the Most Holy Theotokos appeared August 8, 1314 to the Rostov hierarch Prochorus. Going about his diocese, the saint visited the environs of the White Lake and from there traveled along the banks of the river Sheksna and Volga to Yaroslavl. He stopped with the approach of night 7 versts distant from Yaroslavl on the river Tolga. At midnight, when everyone was asleep, the saint awoke and saw a bright light illuminating the area. The light proceeded from a fiery column on the other side of the bank of the river to which there stretched a bridge. Taking up his staff, the saint went across to the other bank, and having approached the fiery column, he beheld on it the icon of the Most Holy Theotokos suspended in the air. Astonished at the miracle, the saint prayed for a long time, and when he went back, he forgot to take his staff. The next day, after serving matins, when St. Prochorus was preparing to continue the journey by boat, they began to search for his staff, but they were not able to find it anywhere. The saint then remembered that he had forgotten his staff on the other side of the river, where he had gone across the miraculous bridge. He then revealed what had occurred and sent his servants across the river on a boat to the other shore. They came back and reported that in the forest, they had indeed seen an icon of the Mother of God suspended in the branches of the tree next to his bishop's staff. The saint quickly crossed over with all his retinue to the opposite shore, and he recognized the icon that had appeared to him. Then, after fervent prayer before the icon, they cleared the forest at that place and put down the foundations of a church. When the people of Yaroslavl learned of this, they came out to the indicated spot. By midday, the church was already built, and in the evening, the saint consecrated it in honor of the entrance into the temple of the Most Holy Theotokos. And having installed the icon there, he established a feast on the day of its appearance. St. Prochorus later built the Tolga Monastery near this church. He died on September 7, 1328. Granted, there are details in the story which do not seem credible. One question I might have is, how did the materials of the church happen to arrive in time to build an entire building in the morning? Also, we don't know the details behind this story. Perhaps St. Prochorus was having a hard time of it in Rostov and needed to found a different see. Or perhaps he wanted to leave his own legacy, and that was not going to happen in Rostov. In many ways, neither the background nor the details of building matter. Rather, what we can focus on is that the appearance of the icon catalyzed the building of a church and a monastery and consolidated the vision and purpose of a community. This kind of vision doesn't happen by human effort, but by the energy of the divine. This is a story about the continued care and provision of God through the image. In this case, it so happens to be a literal bridge to an icon of the Theotokos for his people. So another way Orthodox Christians have always used icons for protection, another way Orthodox Christians have always used icons for protection is for protection. And I'd like to tell a story about my icon teacher, Vladislav Andreev, who is 84 years old. As many of you know, he is a Russian immigrant to America who rediscovered a technique of egg tempera for painting icons, which he then developed into a distinctive American style of iconography. He is the founder of the Proserpine School of Iconology and Iconography. And many of you will have heard this story, but I want to retell it because it leads us into a discussion about icons in the time of trouble. When Vladislav and his sister lived in St. Petersburg in Russia during the German occupation in World War II, most of the young children were sent to the countryside because it was too difficult to supply the city with food. Vladislav and his sister went to live with their grandmother, Agafia. Her son, Vladislav's godfather, was in the Russian resistance against the Nazis. The Germans discovered where Vladislav's uncle lived, and they set fire to the house. A really kind thing to do to a grandmother with grandchildren, but it sent a clear message. Vladislav was very young at the time, perhaps 5. What he remembers is that his grandmother gathered Vladislav and his sister along with an icon and fled outside. The grandmother told the children that everything would be fine and marched around the house 3 times in the cold night with the icon held high, asking God for protection. The fire stopped. The children returned to bed. The Germans tried 2 more times to burn down the house, finally succeeding on the 3rd time. After that, the family lived in a cave for the remaining part of the siege of St. Petersburg. I tell this story because it's a contemporary story of how an icon was used during a severe time of trouble. Remember, this was Soviet Russia. Icons were not allowed. They were hidden and people prayed privately, but no one displayed them publicly, except maybe in the churches that were still permitted to be open. The fire, the parade around the house, and the grandmother's confidence of the protection of the icon made an indelible impression on a young boy. Andreev recalls that the icon was, quote, the instrument of their rescue. There are thousands of stories like these, volumes of books retelling and preserving the stories of healings, protections, deliverances, and wonder working. But what is it about the icon that draws and comforts people during these times of trouble, literally rescuing them? Why do people make processions around burning houses or throughout cities? Here is a photo of a procession in 2004 when the Tikhvin icon was returned to Russia. This is the way in the center the icon looks with its covering or oklad. On the left is the icon without the covering, and to the right is the procession, and it stretched for miles down the road. There are several notable parade examples in icon history. Aside from the famous Triumph of Orthodoxy procession, which takes place on the second Sunday of Lent, that was instituted in 843 to honor the cessation of war and the reinstitution of holy icons as one of the three symbols of the church. This icon that you see right now is the first Triumph of Orthodoxy icon. So I think you probably all know the other two symbols, but I'd like to review them. It's scriptures, the cross, and the icon were all considered symbols for the church. Okay, so let's go back to these processions with icons. In 626, Constantinople was besieged by the Persians. I have here an image of, it's a manuscript painting. And if you can look up here, there's a little image of the Theotokos, and down here is a Mandylion. So the story goes, the generals and most of the armies were away fighting other battles, so the defense of the city fell to Patriarch Sergius and his magistrate Bonus. Every day, the patriarch paraded this icon of the Theotokos around the walls of the city, visibly proclaiming that God was on the side of the Byzantines. And every day, the defenders managed to fight off the attackers. Finally, by August 7th, the Persians, who had already burned all the outlying suburbs, believed that this was going to be the final battle. An unexpected hurricane scattered the attackers and destroyed the fleet upon the shoreline. Sources say that as the king of the Persians watched his army being destroyed, he looked up, and on the wall of the city, he saw a woman in shining garments whose face was full of light, undoubtedly the Theotokos. The inhabitants spent the night in prayer and thanksgiving before the icon of the Theotokos at the Blachernae church. Such an event of terror, of being wiped out, the unbelievable relief at the divine deliverance, and all-night prayers of thanksgiving to the icon which had protected them have clearly resonated with people for 1,400 years since that night. The Akathist hymn, a hymn which is sung while standing, called O Champion Leader, was written for this victory and sung the night of August 7th, 626. It is still being sung today. Here is my church. I did a recording actually last year before I knew about this of the O Champion Leader. So if you read the words, the first stanza, it says, you're faithful, inscribe to you the prize of victory as gratitude for being rescued. And then the second part says, but since you have this invincible power, free us from all kinds of perils. So the song asks the Theotokos to not only free us from all peril, but they're not just attacks, they're both physical and spiritual. Another famous icon procession is the yearly procession of the cross in Constantinople, every August 1st. The relic of the true cross was taken from the imperial treasury each August, the 1st of August, and processed around the city daily until the Feast of the Dormition on August 15th. This was because August was the time of year when illnesses and plagues broke out in the city. Why do I say icon when it was a cross that was processed? Well, in front of you, you have a picture of a cross that was taken by the Crusaders in 1204. This cross now resides in Germany. Do you notice the decoration? The icons of angels are protecting the cross. So when I say icon, it's because of the fact that the vessel which held the cross was most likely decorated with icons, but the parade or procession itself also became an image of each participant's own cross-carrying journey throughout life, both for them at that time and for us 1,400 years later. These stories illustrate that icons were used in times of trouble, both in the past and today, but why exactly? In the East, obviously the icon was a visible, tangible, material object which comforted and gave hope in times of trouble. In the West, presumably, where icons weren't a part of the culture, people found other means of succor. Today, in both the East and the West, people might find solace in exercise, anti-anxiety medicine, getting lost in video games, or even baking sourdough bread. However, there are still many people all over the world who find peace in front of their icon corners. Why? My first observation is that icons are intimately connected with healing. The icons on our walls in churches or museums are images of people who are saints. To become a saint essentially means that you have been healed. Your own human image reflects God's image in some perfect way that is recognized by the church. Images of saints bridge and connect us to the true icon. What do I mean by true icon? The misty story of icon development actually begins in Genesis, where we are told that God made humanity in his image and likeness, making each human being an icon, so to speak. This image of God, the image which was every human being, became tarnished and broken in the fall, like Humpty Dumpty. So for the Judeo-Christian world's understanding of humanity from its inception, we have the concept of an image, the human image icon, with the need for healing, for being put back together again. The Jewish prophets tell of a Savior to come who would cure diseases, heal the blind, make the lame walk, and the dumb sing. The entire Jewish race awaited this Messiah who would make whole the broken image. The Christian New Testament authors wrote about the person that they believe filled those Old Testament prophecies, Jesus. Historically, this Jesus really did cure diseases, heal the blind, make the lame walk, and the dumb sing. For some, not most of the Jews at the time, the healing substantiated Christ's claim that he was not only man, but that he was also God. This Jesus was the true icon. Consider the story of healing of the woman with the hemorrhage of blood that's in Mark. See if you can notice the twinning. At that time, a great crowd followed Jesus and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had had a flow of blood for 12 years and who had suffered much under many physicians and had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard reports about Jesus and had come up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, "If I even touch his garments, I shall be made well." And immediately the hemorrhage ceased, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that the power had gone forth from him, immediately turned to the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" So did you hear that twinning? The woman felt in her body that she was healed, and simultaneously Jesus perceived that there was something going out of him, the power had gone forth. Christ, who St. Paul calls the firstborn icon or image of God, heals the woman. The woman, a bleeding, broken image, touches the true image, the proto-image, Christ, and is healed. It is possible that God can heal without becoming human, but by becoming human, he not only fuses the immaterial into the material, he also becomes a mirror reflecting who each of us might become. When we look at him, we see ourselves, not the broken images we know, but our perfect selves. The fact of God becoming human flesh, the fact that this occurred means that our human nature, which is both material and spiritual, can be totally healed. Every icon you come in contact with then is a bridge that connects to the possibility of our own healing or protection or divine provision. Every icon is both a mirror of what we might become, what we'd like to become, and a transmission of the spiritual into the material. The medieval art of the West shows a psychological working through of trauma of their times, which, of course, potentially heals on a physical level. But this is not the same as what the icon offers. Consider this story of the icon of the image not made by hand, also known as the Mandylion, which tradition holds was to be the first painted icon. For Orthodox Christians, it is the story of King Abgar of Edessa. The story developed over time, but the traditional story accepted today by the church is that King Abgar sent a messenger to ask Jesus to come to Edessa and heal him from his own personal pandemic. In turn, King Abgar promised to protect Jesus. The messenger was told that if Jesus refused, he should paint a picture of Jesus. The story goes on to say that Jesus did refuse. As the messenger was attempting to paint his image, Christ knew this would not be possible. So Christ took the cloth, wiped his face, which imprinted Christ's image onto the cloth. When King Abgar received the cloth and looked at the image, his disease was healed. What we learn from this story is that the vehicle of healing is the image. Christ, the firstborn image, healed King Abgar through his imprinted image. Here we have on the screen the image of Abgar receiving the icon cloth. And then on the right, we have the image of the very famous Novgorodian icon not made by hand. It's from the 1100s. This Edessa icon not made by hands is also reported to have protected the city of Edessa from invasion, even earlier than the other 626 Constantinople battle. So the Mandylion on the wall, which I showed you in the other illustration, is a visual reference to this story of the Edessa icon. After King Abgar died, the city reverted to its pagan ways, and so the bishop placed the precious image of the Mandylion in an alcove above the city in a wall, presumably above the gate. He lit an oil lamp and then sealed up the wall with the burning lamp and image inside. It was found again the night before a Persian invasion in the 500s because of a vision with the lamp still lit. The miraculous oil was used to light the Persians on fire and ultimately protected the city. So in this story, what we have is we can trace the broadening of the use of the first icon, which was going to heal an individual, King Abgar, to the protecting of the entire city. I'd like to tell one more story, and this story illustrates that healing and protecting, reinvigorating energy that the icon carries is present and available today. This is Hawaii's Merce Dreaming Ivaron icon, and some of you may have visited it. You can go online and find out where this icon will be next. I saw it, I think about 7 or 8 years ago in Princeton when it was traveling around. So you can go and see this icon in person, and a priest might even give you some of the myrrh that's still streaming. There's a famous Theotokos icon on Mount Athos in Greece in the Ivaron Monastery that stands at the portal of a church. It is known for healing and helping those who visit, and this Iveron icon has its own very interesting story of miracles and healing attached to it. One day, a person who visited the Iveron monastery brought a copy of the icon to Montreal. Miraculously, this Montreal copy began to stream myrrh. Naturally, a copy was made of the Montreal myrrh streaming icon, and a copy of the copy of the copy of the copy was brought to Hawaii. This copy, which had fallen down on the top shelf of a deacon's study, began to ooze myrrh too. I believe it was in 2007. It is still streaming myrrh today. And I relate this story to demonstrate that all of these uses of the icon, liturgical, energizing, protecting, and healing, are very much in practice today. This is not something relegated to the history books, but these healings are still happening 2,000 years later. You can go see this icon for yourself. We are in the midst of dealing with the reality of a pandemic. We are uncertain about the nature of the disease, how long it will last. Can we get reinfected? We have all of these unknowns, very real dangers for many people, and no end in sight. And knowing that there are things are never so bad that they can't get worse, my dear daughter reminded me recently that after every plague, there's been a war. Happy, happy thoughts. In light of all this, for me, as a practicing iconographer and Orthodox Christian, the icon stands as a beacon of stability and truth in our upside down world. Not because it is unchanged or ancient, but precisely because it fuses the immaterial world to the material world. The icon demonstrates in hard, real materials that what appears to be immaterial to our eyes is actually everywhere present and filling all things. The vision of the shining lady standing over the walls of Constantinople is present here today, protecting us. The confidence of the grandmother parading an icon around her house to stop a fire is possible today because the icon makes present the immaterial spiritual world which heals and protects us. Yet, the icon is not a magic talisman that will protect me from getting COVID-19. Vladislav's house eventually got burned down. Constantinople eventually fell to the Turks. The woman with the flow of blood eventually died. Rather, the icon makes present the spiritual world where I know I am in God's hands and everything that He has for me is good. One day, the broken icon of me, Lynette, an unworthy iconographer, will be healed for good, both physically and spiritually. Every icon testifies to this truth, the possibility of healing. It is powerful and compelling. It comforts and attracts and ultimately protects all who have eyes to see. Thank you. Amy?
Thank you, Lynette. I know it's so awkward when you end a presentation like this because there's no audience to really applaud you. But thank you for sharing your perspective. I think you really hit the nail on the head and gave us a lot to think about. We're happy to take questions. You can use either the chat or the Q&A feature, whatever is easiest for you. So we'll give folks just a minute or two to think up some questions if they have any.
Okay, I'll just show the icon again. This is the icon. It's a healing. It will heal now. This is an icon that I'm doing a giveaway for. So if you're interested, it's on Instagram, Wrestling with Angels. Amy, are there any icons in the museum that have ever been healing icons or have done any weeping, myrrh weeping or anything like that?
We don't have any myrrh streaming icons, although we have one St. Nicholas icon that we call Sticky Nick. And and basically, you know, we did approach it as if it were a Mer streaming icon, but our conservator, Sasha Gassel, has determined that the reason why Nick keeps weeping is because someone actually coated him, I believe, with olive oil.
Oh, wow.
Yes, instead of Olifa. So, he had an unfortunate accident, and you know, is not a miracle working icon in that sense. But no, we don't have anything like that in the collection currently.
Yeah, interesting. Well, it's interesting because sometimes, like the miracle weeping icons, they stop weeping. I mean, they don't continue forever. I was in Serbia at one time, and I saw the casket of, I think it was Stephen Dechani, who is it was at the Dechani Monastery, and it was St. Stephen, who had been the king and then became a monk, I think. And for years, evidently, the casket was made of stone, and they actually had at the bottom of the casket like a trough that was filled with myrrh. When I was there, of course, the myrrh was all gone and it quit weeping. But evidently, for several hundred years, they got buckets of myrrh out of there. So it's interesting. I mean, we have sort of some that are continuing, and then we have many instances where icons or the relics stop streaming myrrh.
Mm-hmm. So since we're talking about myrrh, we actually have a question about that. So we'll jump in. We're actually getting a lot of good questions in. So someone would like to know, what is the meaning and significance of myrrh?
Wait, you cut out there for a minute. What was the question?
Sorry. What is the meaning and significance of myrrh in the myrrh streaming icons?
So the meaning is that it's a miracle, that, you know, a board, or in the Ibaran Hawaii icon, it's a piece of paper, it's a cardboard icon, and it just keeps oozing and weeping myrrh. And it makes no sense. So the meaning is that it's a miracle. I mean, it's actual myrrh. I've had some, and the priest at my church right now, I live in Norfolk, Virginia, and I go to a church in Virginia Beach, and he gets myrrh to anoint people at different times of the year from this icon. So it smells really good. It smells sweet, sometimes like roses, and it's just like it's not really an oil, it's myrrh.
So we have a couple questions that are in the same vein. They're looking to really understand this idea of icons being copies of copies, and does that somehow dilute their power? And is the original icon sort of the most powerful of those copies?
Well, that's a great question. And I would say that, again, the icon is not a talisman. It's not something that if we keep it around us, it's going to have sort of the paper itself have power, or the board itself have power. It's the fact that the spiritual sort of connects to it. And it is true that the handwritten icon, I mean, there's a continuum of truth. I like to, one time my icon teacher answered a similar question, and I thought it was the most brilliant way of answering the question. There's a continuum of truth. Some things are closer to the truth, and some things are further away from the truth. So a handwritten icon by a nun or a monk or an iconographer is bringing all their sort of personal image of themselves into the board, and that's something that's beautiful and connects. And the photograph of that image is one step removed. And then if you make another copy of it, it keeps removing from the proto image. But that doesn't mean that a paper icon can't be the vehicle of a miracle. I mean, miracles happen all the time around us, and it's the fact of the miracle. It's not, the miracle does not prevent or somehow make better an icon because it had this miracle occur. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we don't somehow venerate paper icons and lift them higher than hand painted icons just because it had a miracle associated with the paper icon. It's a miracle. That's a distinct difference. It's a different category.
Right. So how does the practice of writing an icon assist in the healing that you described and look forward to?
So that's a great question too. And I have to say, I became Orthodox because of the practice of writing icons. And for me, when I took my first icon class, which was now a while ago, I realized that a lot of things that I understood in my head and I understood theologically from a very rational point of view, the practice of doing something on the board made those things move from just my head into a deeper place in my heart. And because we are creatures that have a physical, sensible aspect to us, our bodies, those bodies participate in the world of the immaterial. And they participate in, we join, we as humans join the material and the spiritual. And so we're not just creatures that are going to die and turn to dust. I don't believe that. But we're also not just like this soul that's floating out somewhere and our bodies don't matter. Both things matter. And so for me, the practice of writing the icons helped sort of unite the rational mind with my body and move more into the area of what the church fathers would call your heart. And it's not the heart like we would say in the United States, you know, it's not like the Valentine's heart, but it's the heart, which is the very deepest part of your personhood.
Great. So kind of going back to the idea of the weeping icon, this person has heard some clergy say that the icons weep as a call to repentance. How does that fit with the idea of healing or of the healing icon?
Yeah, well, I mean, in many ways, I think that every time an icon weeps or there's some miracle that we understand happen, you know, we're not God. We don't know everything. Of course, a lot of times people will say, oh, it's because we need to repent. And, you know, in a sense, repentance is connected with healing, because what is repentance? But it's a metanoia. It's a change of mind. It's a going back to the beginning where we once again place ourselves in front of God and have Him speak into our life. So, you know, I wouldn't say that I would know the reason, any reason why an icon started to be a miracle producing weeping icon. That's not for me to say. If the church says that this is because of the need for repentance, then I think that the healing is connected with the idea of metanoia and change of heart, change of mind.
Great. Someone is curious if you've ever seen the Weeping Black Madonna in Częstochowa, Poland.
No, I've never seen that. I would love to see it. You know, there's a shrine in Philadelphia, which has, I think, a copy of it, which is supposed to be really wonderful. And I need to go there too. I have seen, very interestingly, a Black Madonna. There's a number of them in Europe, not too many, but I have seen one in Italy, in the northern mountains of Italy. That was evidently, there was a miracle associated with this in that they tried to build this big church around it, and every time that the icon was moved, that in the morning the icon was back to its small little chapel. So I saw it in the small little chapel, and it was you know, a wonderful icon.
Wow. I need to get out and see some more icons.
Maybe after COVID-19.
Right. Maybe we can get some miracle working icons to come to Massachusetts. I mean,
exactly.
Help. All right, just kind of going through some of the questions. Let's see. Can you touch on a little bit more about the contrast between Byzantine icons and Western art of past plagues?
So, honestly, I'm not an art historian, and I put that in the lecture just to give a contrast. If you do Google, it's pretty interesting because I Googled bubonic plague, Middle Ages art, and there's hundreds of woodcuts of paintings, oil paintings, illustrations, illuminated manuscripts on images. A lot of times they will show people with spots on their faces. They'll show, very gruesome bodies lying stacked up, and it's pretty gruesome. And really, I couldn't find anything about sort of plagues except for one image that I couldn't actually get a good copy of to put up there, of sort of Eastern. Actually, the closest one was the 626 illustration that I showed you of Constantinople. So, that's really just to show the juxtaposition, because in the East, really, you have icons, and the icons is the art all the way up until after the fall of Constantinople. And then, in the 20th century, in the 1800s, both in Greece and Russia, there was kind of a decadence, and you can see sort of the icons sort of pulling away from what had been the tradition. And, the world sort of collapsed in World War II and in the Soviet Revolution, and you had all this stuff with Greece, and so both churches of Greece and of Russia were really under servitude, and they were destroyed for hundreds of years. For Greece for 400 years, and for Russia for the 80 years of its the Soviet time. And so during that time, you weren't allowed to really produce icons. In Greece, you kind of could, but the production of icons went elsewhere. And so other things started to take the place, is what happened.
Right. That's actually one of the, one question that always makes me chuckle at the museum is when someone comes in and says, let me see the icons from the Soviet period. Yeah. Like, well, let's back up a minute.
Right. Well, it's interesting. You could almost say that some of the modern art was the essential of the icons. People have talked about that a lot, Malevich and stuff like that, but
right.
Those aren't really icons.
No. So I don't see any new questions coming in. So thank you again, everyone. Oh wait, actually here's a really great question. We'll close on this. Do you have an icon that you are drawn to the most?
Well, do I have an icon that I'm drawn to the most? That's a great question. I have to say that over time, it's changed. Right now in my house, I have all the icons from the exhibition on the walls, which means I have massive amounts of icons here. And I feel like it's such a privilege to have all these icons around, and it's hard to say which one I really am attracted to. I actually brought this icon up for the lecture. I'll show it to you. This is an icon that Vladislav, it's a little tiny sort of travel icon that Vladislav made for me about 10 years ago, I guess, of the Theotokos. You can see that he decorated it. And I keep this by my bedside, and I find it it's a treasure for me because first of all, it's from Vladislav, but also because of the image of the Theotokos with her son. It's a very loving image. So I really like this one. I recently, in fact, just before COVID started, I went with my daughter to Greece. There's a monastery there that we've gone to a number of times where she had spent some time. And one of the nuns took us to the cave of St. Gregory Palamas. And at that cave, there was a monastery. And in the monastery, there was this icon of Saint Matrona that the whole reason why it had been made and given to the icon was sort of miraculous. So I have a little wooden icon of that one. It's a reproduction, and I really love that icon. One of the things that Saint Matrona likes is to have fresh flowers. And I love fresh flowers, so it's really nice to put fresh flowers at the Saint Matrona icon and think of this time of Greece. And Saint Matrona was blind, but this icon has Matrona's eyes open. So I just always pray that God will give me eyes to see what I need to see for that day. And I ask her for her help with that, for sight.
Oh, that's very special. And thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate it. This webinar will be available as a recording on our website probably by midweek. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me at any time, and we'll see you at the next program. Thanks so much. Thank you again, Lynette.
Yep, thanks, Amy. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.